The year is 1849, and Isa Whitney has just published his idea of making a railroad that would travel between Chicago and California. In 1852, Theodore Judah set apart on a survey to find a navigable route across the rugged Sierra Nevada mountains and presented that to Congress in 1856. It would not be until 1862 that Congress would actually pass the Pacific Railroad Act, commissioning the Central Pacific Railroad and the Union Pacific Railroad to begin building the Great Transcontinental Railroad System. Hey guys, today is all about history. So welcome to the Golden Spike National Historical Park. This is the location where the Transcontinental Railroad met each other on their westward and eastward expansion, and they drove the ceremonial Golden Spike in the ground. And yes, it is cold, there's a lot of snow, and it is very windy. But nonetheless, let's go look at some trains. The year is now 1863, and construction begins along the 32nd parallel as the initial transcontinental route. As Congress had authorized 2 companies to build the railroad, the Union Pacific employed more than 8,000 Irish, German, and Italian immigrants and was building west from Omaha, Nebraska. The Central Pacific Railroad, whose workforce included over 10,000 Chinese laborers, was building eastward from Sacramento, California. The Central Pacific would find it very easy to source materials such as timber, as the Sierra Nevadas were heavily forested, although actual construction was very slow as the mountain ranges were extremely rugged and hard on men and equipment, while the Union Pacific would find construction across the open plains very easy, although supplies for them was very hard to come by as there was very little timber and it could only be sourced across the riverbanks or brought in from remote locations. The Central Pacific actually had so much timber at hand that they built sawmills to where each one of their railroad ties were absolutely identical, whereas the Union Pacific, having to scrounge for wood wherever they could find it, were all individually made and hand-hewn, making each tie unique in shape and form. I'm going to read you a passage titled Hell on Wheels. Many of you may recognize that as a made-for-TV series that was actually quite factual of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, with just a few shenanigans thrown in for dramatization. It goes on to say, at North Platte they were having a good time, gambling, drinking, and shooting each other. As the Transcontinental Railroad pushed westward, towns sprang up along the route. These towns, referred to as Hell on Wheels, were composed of tents with false fronts, giving the appearance of permanent structures. Within the tents existed all sorts of vices provided by merchants and profiteers ready to relieve railroad workers of their hard-earned coin. Drinking, gambling, and prostitution were the popular pastimes of the railroad workers. Gamblers, swindlers, murderers, and women, not the marrying kind, frequented Hell on Wheels towns. For every man killed on the railroad, it is estimated 4 were killed in these appropriately named towns. Vigilance committees were formed to run off the riffraff. Law and order arrived, but enforcing the laws was difficult and often impossible. As the railroad moved west, many towns were abandoned, leaving behind remnants of their stories. Some Hell on Wheels towns, such as Cheyenne and Laramie, Wyoming, thrived after the railroad moved on, while others completely disappeared. Laying 5 miles of track in a single day was a near feat that was almost impossible, but 10 miles was a record that would never be broken ever again. The 2 engines that met here at Promontory Summit for the celebration of the railroad lines coming together, Jupiter and Old Number 119, are housed at a nearby work facility during the winter months. As we are here during the winter months, we are going to travel over across the road over to the workshop where the engines are stored, and during these winter months is when they do all the maintenance and the upgrades and painting and all that stuff on them. So we're going to follow the park ranger on over here to the maintenance shed where he is going to let us tour the engineer's workshop, basically, where they are working on the trains right now. Now, during the regular season, during the summer months mainly, they do run these trains every single day, kind of recreating the ceremony where they met, and of course they blow all the train whistles, and you can look at them, and they are both steam powered still. One of them does run off of timber, as you know, timber was abundant for one rail line, yet the other rail line didn't have timber, so they used a lot of coal to run their trains. And these trains are still run on the authentic fuels that they were originally designed to run with. So one is wood fired and one is coal fired.
And the reason for the difference is geography. So, what does California have a lot of? You've got traffic and fish tacos and avocados, movie stars, and anyway, California's got a lot of great things, but they don't have a lot of coal inside as well. So a lot of that land that the Union Pacific was getting in southern Wyoming is loaded with coal. If you've ever driven along I-80, you've seen those coal mines. So they're able to use coal pretty much right next to the tracks as they're operating and building the railroad. This month is actually the anniversary of the first coal mine explosion west of the Mississippi River, which I think is 1883. But where that came from is a few of those coal mines that the Union Pacific had. They actually sold them to the Central Pacific so they could start running coal in their locomotives. And in a little town called Albany, Wyoming, they sold one of their mines, which ended up having lots and lots of coal mine explosion problems. Jupiter, blue one, Central Pacific Railroad, and then the number 119 Union Pacific Railroad. So they're both replicas. They were built 1979 by O'Connor Engineering. We do run them in the summer. They do actually operate. We actually run them every single day from May 1st to mid-October. So come back during the summer, and I promise you this is a way more exciting part.
Can you ride it?
We don't do rides. We just kind of run them for show. We blow the whistles, ring the bells. The thing with this railroad, we go coast to coast. We do it by ship. you can spend upwards of $600 a ticket. So Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act in 1862. During the Civil War, there's two reasons for that. One, he wanted the ability to get troops from coast to coast in less than 2 weeks because he wasn't sure how long the Civil War was going to go for. We also didn't have the greatest relationship with Great Britain back then. We were trying to figure out what our boundary for Canada was going to be around the Oregon area. So we wanted the ability to move troops quickly out to the west coast. The other reason why they signed the Pacific Railway Act is as early as the 1850s, we could agree that this country needs a transcontinental railroad. But the thing that Congress could agree on is where that first one should go. So they actually mapped out 5 possible routes in the 1850s. And when each of those routes came up in front of Congress, the senators and congressmen would only vote for the routes in favor of their region. So the northern states wanted the north, the southern wanted the south, central somewhere in the middle. So when the Civil War broke out, something very magical happened. Congress could agree on something, and it's mostly because half of them were gone. So as soon as the Civil War broke out, all of those southern senators and congressmen were gone. So when they put up a railway act, a proposal for a railroad on the central route, it passed Congress because you only have the central and the northern states left, which is why they picked the route that they did. I won't complain. Kids are happy.
Close.
Yeah,
Close.
close enough.
Are the two engines like the same or differences?
The boilers are identical.
And well, folks, here it is. If you're into history, like I am, this is the meeting point of the Union Pacific Railroad and the Central Pacific Railroad. The great tracks to the west, the great tracks to the east, and this was the final meeting point that was agreed upon. Originally, there was actually no real destination of where the two companies were going to meet each other, and both companies were just rapidly laying track across Utah, just racing towards each other, and at one point in time, they were actually laying track next to each other. One kept going west and one kept going east because they didn't know where they were supposed to meet up. So there was actually a lot of track laid that was never, ever even used. They ended up tearing those sections back out, and, well, this is where it joined up. So, in history, this is a great junction. In the war of business, though, it was a very, very nasty business building this railroad. I mean, it was entirely based around money, as which most things are nowadays. But for each mile of track that the railroad laid, they got so much land in exchange by government grants and different programs and such forth as that. And one company was lumber happy and one company was coal happy. And they were doing everything and anything possible to grab up as much of those land grants as they could get. Greed, it always sets in no matter what you do. So I mentioned earlier about history saying that this was at Promontory Point, which it is really not. Promontory Point is actually about 30 miles, I think, south of us, kind of here. But this really is Promontory Summit, per se. It's not necessarily the top of the mountains here. As you can see, there's mountains all around us. But the summit here basically is the highest point in the valley, which is where they could, ultimately lay the tracks. They had found a route to come between all the mountains here, where they had to avoid all the extremely difficult labor of, shoveling beds out and blasting through canyons and over the mountains and stuff like that. So the final resting place was here at Promontory Summit, not Promontory Point. If you like history, trains, I do. I love it all, but it's a very neat thing out here. The park rangers are super, super nice, informative. They love to talk about it. And if you're an off-roader, there is one here that he loves to go off-roading also. But it's a really cool place. He said if you come in the summertime, you can actually see both of the engines. They are working, operational. They strive to maintain them very well, and that's what they're doing right now. They're just working on them. That's why they're in the engine house. It's the weather's beautiful today, but the time of year that we're here, they just not applicable to run them really. But he said if you come in the summertime, you will see both of those trains. They do run them up and down the tracks to show them off and let everybody see them, and that would be super cool. So we're definitely going to have to make a point to come back and see that. So thanks for coming along here at the Golden Spike Historical Site, Promontory Summit, elevation 4,905 feet. Okay, guys, a lot of talking, I know, and again, a very long video. I do apologize for that. You remember me telling you earlier, though, that one of the park rangers was an avid off-roader. So he was telling us that within the national park that they manage and maintain 2 auto routes. Now, with it being in the national park and this time of the year with all the weather, those routes are actually closed. However, if you remember, most of this land around here is BLM land with public access roads. So he gave us a route. He said just exit out of the national park, hang a left on this road here. We're going to run it about 17, somewhere between 17 and 20 miles out here, and we can actually intersect where the original Transcontinental Railroad bed crossed over around the Great Salt Lake. So that was pretty cool of him. We really appreciate you sharing that information with us. Thank you, sir. But nevertheless, we are going to do that. We're going to head on out here and see what we can find. We're ultimately heading to a destination of one of the original Hell on Wheels towns called Cosmos. Now, there's nothing left of it. There's absolutely zero remnants of it. All we have is just the GPS coordinates of it and a pin drop here where we can find it. But I thought that was super cool. So we're going to go out here and we're going to see if we can find the Transcontinental Railroad bed. Watch out for wildlife. Hey guys, I'm sorry about the wind. We left the Golden Spike site and we taken some back roads just out across the mountains to come out here out and back around the Great Salt Lake, which is out there in the distance out there in front of us. And you can actually come out here and you can intersect the original route of the original Transcontinental Railroad bed, and you can get on it. Not while we're here. The conditions are just not going to make it happen today. Just too wet still here in the winter. But you can actually follow the original bed of the Transcontinental Railroad, and you can zigzag around through all of these mountains, and ultimately you can end up all the way back at Bonneville around the Salt Flats where we were at when we went to the top of the volcano. I wish I had a better camera. There's so much stuff out here I'd love to show you guys. Out there in the horizon, it just literally disappears and it looks like a mirror, like it just ends. But Ultimately, it heads all the way towards Bonneville. But it is, again, breathtakingly beautiful out here. We're just out in the middle of absolute nowhere. We're about 17 miles from the Golden Spike area where we were at, just literally taking back roads straight out into the mountains. So we went ahead and drove on a little bit further down towards the Salt Lake and on the mountains areas. On a map, we're actually around a community that would have been known as Cosmo, I believe, K-O-S-M-O. And I've actually come across now, I can actually kind of really see it. Just have to use your imagination. But you'll notice there's a line out there that just doesn't appear that it really should be there. And it makes a real slow, gentle arc all the way back around, going this way, all the way down there. But okay, guys, I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to interject here and just over voice all this because the wind has just gotten horrible, brutal. What I'm trying to explain is that line right out there that you see, that is the original Transcontinental Railroad bed. And so we are such a long ways away from it that it's kind of easy to make it out as a line that really doesn't belong there. So it just makes a real gentle arc out there across the Salt Lake, and it just goes all the way back around here, and eventually you will make your way all the way back up towards Bonneville Salt Flats. And with that, our day was over at Golden Spike National Park. An amazing bit of scenery. We ultimately ended up about 38 miles out from the park. Unbelievable, guys. We will definitely have to return in the summer months to revisit. It is just so beautiful out here, and I am so looking forward to being able to drive literally all the way from here back to the Bonneville Salt Flats. But nevertheless, our day was over. It was time to start making our way back towards the Golden Spike National Park. Golden Spike National Park is that way. Idaho is not very far over the back of those mountains right there. Unfortunately for us, we're going that way, back to Salt Lake, as our trip has come to an end and it is time to go home, unfortunately. It was so tempting to go to Idaho. It's literally, I think he said, about 22 miles. We could have technically been to Idaho also, but we'll save that one for next time. But I definitely recommend the Golden Spike National Park. It's just a really beautiful environment. And anyway, all the guys there were great. But that's it for us. It's been an awesome trip, and we really appreciate you guys coming along.